Welcome back to another episode of the Iceberg Mountain. We're really excited to talk to you today about a subject close to our hearts, which is choice and autonomy. And I think for me, the heart of this is about student experience and the joy I see in kids when they have some level of choice and autonomy. And we want to talk about a little bit about the psychology behind why having choices is important. And then secondly, about some things that you can do in your practice to hopefully bring a bit more choice and autonomy into your practice for your students.
Yeah. The more control children have in their lives, the less they look to control the things they can't. That's why it's not really about the red plate, it's about getting to make their own choice. Autonomy is one cup that young children need filled regularly, and making choices is one way they fulfill that need.
If you have small children yourself, you're definitely aware of this red plate scenario. And it might not be a red plate, it might be what food we're eating, where we're going, if we have to walk steps upstairs, whatever it happens to be.
I really enjoy that quote because it just helps us to really understand that just children naturally need choice and want to have some autonomy in their life.
And how we wanted to think about that today is how that relates to our school day. And not just for students, but also for teachers, because they're an important group that also require autonomy. And I think we also talked this week about how that extends into adult life. And I was reading recently Daniel Pink's book, Drive. The main underlying idea behind that is there are three things that people need to thrive and become creative people in their fields. And so he's looking at it from a business perspective, but I think it runs through everything, whether it's you're in a family or you're at work or any other place. And he talks about the three things being autonomy, so having some level of choice and freedom over what you do, mastery, so having some level of skill set, and then purpose, like there is a purpose to what you're doing. And I think, so one thing I did a while ago was write down on this little file card, do you give your students choice with a capital C or a little c? And those capital C items are things like, do they get to choose maybe what subject they study, or how they study it, or how they present it, or indeed maybe how they do their research, as opposed to, I think, what we often give students at school, which is like, what color paper do you want to use? Do you want to use a red pen or a blue pen? Who do you want to sit with? Who do you want to work with? Those are choices that they're a choice for sure, but they don't give you a lot of autonomy over what you're actually doing and learning. So one resource we've used when we've been looking at this is this book, The Learning Game, by Anna Lorena Fabrega. She has some really great, simple ideas for giving kids choice and for getting them involved in their own education. Just as a way to think about why it might be important, I think this is a really striking sentence she has in the beginning of her book, where she says, no matter the school, the students were told, sit up, be quiet, pay attention, raise your hand to speak, do as you're told, don't question why. And again, this is kind of like the red plate thing for me. I think we can all relate to this. I know certainly when I was at school, that's how it ran. And I think sometimes we talk a big game about that's not the way it runs at school, but I feel like when I'm around school, that's often what's happening. Sit down, be quiet, do what you're told, walk this way.
I think a lot of us provide choice, voice and choice within the learning experiences we design, but it's always important to have that lens constantly when you are talking about the activities that students get to do and how they learn and what they learn, etc. So
yeah, and then maybe building off that, a researcher that I really like in education is Alfie Kohn, and he definitely has a bit of a darker lens on education than other people, but I think he has a very critical mind and he thinks clearly through things. And one of the quotes, my favorite quote from him in particular, is that children learn to make decisions by making decisions, not by following instructions. And I feel like there's so much depth in that quote that we don't always give students the opportunity to make decisions that matter. And then secondarily, don't give them the opportunity to experience perhaps the consequences that go with those choices. And what we're hoping today is to maybe talk about where we can provide students with opportunities to have those choices and to see how they can become lifelong learners themselves through the choices they make about inquiry and learning.
And based on what Anna wrote in her book, if you're in that context as a student, you're not going to have those opportunities to make those decisions and have consequences, positive or negative. We also liked an IG reel that she posted that really talks about how not having choice can really stifle innovation as well.
How can we expect for kids to be original and come up with novel ideas and find their voice and their edge as a writer and all these things if they're all reading the same thing that they're probably not interested in, but it's like a required reading, and therefore, and learning about the same things and talking about the same things, and therefore they're thinking about the same things. So how do you expect for somebody there to come up with something that's completely original? Like, it's really difficult.
Yeah, I think this video really makes me think about the quote, if you set a project and you get back 22 of the same thing, it's not a project, it's a recipe. And it is that idea that she mentions in there that we have to be careful about the way we structure our projects and things we want students to do to ensure there are opportunities for them to be creative rather than just literally doing the same thing over and producing the same thing. So David, you produce a lot of videos around project-based learning and how that can really impact students. So thinking about the work you've done, how do you find that the idea of choice and autonomy links into what I've heard you describe as high-quality PBL?
There has to be a balance. There has to be choice, but also some control. So what I mean by that is there has to be some scaffolds, some structures placed so that students can take the necessary steps to get to the end goal that they're trying to strive for. So you could provide students with an authentic context, and then students get to identify a problem that they want to solve, the solution that they want to create to solve that problem. So yeah, it's not just about giving students complete autonomy, but guiding them, being that facilitator in that process.
I think too, if I could add into that, we talked the other day about the idea of having skill-based standards that are not hyper-specific around content, but really focused on here is a thinking skill or it's a mathematical skill or whatever it happens to be. That if you have those skill-based standards, then you can still have a very focused unit that addresses the educational outcomes you want, but allows for choice within there. So long as you're working with your students to make sure that what they're choosing aligns with those skills that they need to be able to show at the end.
And that kind of goes with the 20% time, the passion projects that we work on with students. Again, kind of quoting what we talked about in our last episode, how knowledge is just potential.
Knowledge is not power. Knowledge is potential. And if I've got knowledge of stuff, but then I don't use that knowledge to actually do anything, surely that's going to make me subconsciously feel like I'm not fulfilling my potential.
So if knowledge is potential, the actual doing is power.
Yeah, and I think maybe to add on to that, one of the things that I've been thinking about is kind of a lost opportunity that we have sometimes. We provide robotics lessons for our students and they're really engaging and I think very thorough and they work very well. But just because of the way our timetable works, the number of resources we have and things, there are not opportunities for the students to choose to come back and do extra work with those robotics kits. And I feel like if the students did have that, it would increase their mastery, as Daniel Pink talks about. It will give them the opportunity to use that knowledge in a more creative way to innovate and do different things, whether it be for themselves or for a larger problem that they see in society maybe.
Yeah.
I would also maybe just, I would also love to support your idea of talking about 20% time. The levels of participation and the engagement and the enthusiasm of students is so high, certainly comparative to a normal lesson, which is maybe teacher directed, limited choice. Kids really rise to that. And I remember seeing students studying ideas and concepts that were far beyond their years simply because they had the opportunity to do it and they were interested. And I think that in itself really is a very clear way to show the advantage of having some choice, open choice time for students at school.
Yeah. And research kind of backs that up. I saw that there was a report by Hanover Research, which is an organization that does a whole bunch of research to give other organizations a strategic edge. And they did a lot of research on personalized learning. They stated in the report that studies indicate that allowing students a degree of autonomy in their learning experience may enhance their academic performance as well as their engagement in school. And they also added that enhanced motivation to the greater sense of autonomy and competence that students feel when they are able to exert a choice. So you might be asking, how do I start? A great way to start is unit planning or lesson planning, and making sure that you have that voice and choice and autonomy lens while you design your learning experiences. Recently, we had some PD on universal design of learning, which is, it has the foundation of understanding by design, but UDL, or universal design for learning, captures that, but also forces you to kind of think about what barriers can you take away for students so that they can learn, but also embedding a lot of choice and flexibility in the way students learn.
Another area I wanted to talk about today was just the idea of teacher choice and autonomy as well, because I think that's a really important area. If you have happy and engaged teachers who are being creative, then you're necessarily going to have better lessons for your students along the way. And again, I'm going to refer back to Daniel Pink one more time, and he talks about the fact that if individuals, being the adults in an organization, feel like they have limited autonomy, that will often appear in people as feeling like they're being micromanaged, or they're disconnected from their work, or they have fewer opportunities to be creative. And when I think about the times that I've felt really inspired at school and most productive, they're definitely the times where I've been empowered by an administrator or someone who works with me to try something different and to stay within the realms of perhaps the teaching standards that we're looking at, but that I've been given the opportunity to use my own professionalism and skills to develop that in some new or different way to try and increase maybe student engagement or otherwise. It's such an important area because teachers need that autonomy and choice as much as students do. At its heart, what I think autonomy and choice comes down to, particularly when you're dealing with adults, is the idea of trust. That's where we have words like micromanaging and things like that. If you have autonomy and choice and trust, then that's not an issue anymore. People will work and be creative, and like you said, Dave, that becomes a community thing that develops that and makes it even stronger and larger. So if you happen to be an administrator who is looking after people, we would greatly encourage you to maybe read some books like Drive and give the teachers that you manage the opportunity to have autonomy and creative freedom over some of the choices that they make.
That autonomy can provide teachers with joy to actually implement these learning experiences that they design, and their passion, their motivation will rub off onto the students as well. They will get to see that and excite them about what they're learning.
Yeah, definitely. And just to leave you off with a quote from Alfie Kohn, he says, "When students and teachers have more control over their learning and teaching processes, it leads to deeper engagement and motivation. Autonomy fosters creativity, critical thinking, and intrinsic motivation." So I think deep down there are 100 reasons for us to provide more choice and autonomy in our school settings, whether we're an administrator looking after teachers or whether we're a teacher looking after students. It really all comes down to giving people an opportunity to be creative and to be their best selves in a school setting.
And with that, thanks for watching. Be the iceberg
and climb your mountain.